Hello, everyone. I'm Mamta Murthy, the Vice President for Human Development at the World Bank. I'm really delighted to welcome everyone to this very special event today. A few words about why we are having this event. 10 years ago, we launched a seminal publication, our World Development Report, and it focused on gender and development. And it argued that how households interact with markets and institutions, whether formal or informal, is key to understanding gender inequality in all its dimensions. It presented a framework which could explain why progress was faster in some areas of gender inequality than in others. And most importantly, it argued that gender equality was an important development objective in its own right, as well as being smart economics. It argued that it's smart economics to focus on gender because it not only helps women, but it helps with other development objectives and helps break the intergenerational transmission of poverty. It developed tools as well to understand what's driving differences in gender outcomes across many domains. And it argued for policy interventions as well as broader societal actions to improve gender equality in order to support development outcomes for all. Now, that was 10 years ago. And the purpose of this event is to launch a year-long reflection. We're calling it Gender Equality and Development Plus 10, the Accelerating Equality Initiative. And the purpose is to understand what progress has been made in the past 10 years, what lessons have been learned, identify remaining challenges, and of course, build partnerships so that as the World Bank Group, we can work with others and support further progress towards gender equality. Now, a few words on what's happened since 2012. Well, women and girls and boys have seen significant gains, and two areas stand out, particularly education and health. I would also say that in many countries, women have gained political representation and equality under the law. We also have a growing body of evidence that shows that in both communities and companies where women are in decision-making roles, outcomes are better. That's on the positive side. But progress has been uneven, and there are many areas that remain. I would like to highlight economic opportunities for women, especially labor force participation, which has not materialized to the same extent. I should also mention gender-based violence, and this pandemic has unleashed a huge scale of gender-based violence. And representation and leadership remains a challenge. So here today, we would like to discuss what is it that we need to do to address some of these stubborn gender gaps, including those that have been exposed, rather savagely exposed by the pandemic. We know that this will require a holistic approach, and it will require partnership across many institutions. First of all, governments, but also the private sector, financial institutions, multilateral agencies, and perhaps most importantly, local governments, NGOs, women's movements, and civil society organizations. I'm going to start us off on this discussion. We have a very exciting group of panelists. And to start with, we will have our Managing Director of Development Policy and Partnership, Mari Pangestu. Let me just make one technical note. Please use the chat function to participate. We have a host of people who are online speaking 4 languages to respond to your questions. So with no further ado, let me welcome Mari Pangestu. Mari, the floor is yours for opening remarks. Welcome.
Thank you, Mamta. I'm really delighted to open this event. And I want to thank all the distinguished speakers that have joined us today. And as Mamta mentioned, this is really a special event because 2022 marks 10 years since the publication of the World Bank's Group's World Development Report on Gender Equality and Development, which was a very seminal report, as Mamta has already explained, because it really established gender equality as a development priority and smart economic policy. I think this is hugely important, making the argument that investing in women is about smart economic policy. This seminal report provided a framework which was simple but powerful. It helped to explain why progress was faster in some areas than others. And I think this allowed a discussion, a dialogue around the kind of policies that will be needed to make the difference that we want to achieve. And over the last decade, the evidence has increased substantially, and progress has been achieved in several key areas. At the time of the seminal report, the WDR on gender and development, the evidence base was limited and mostly on high-income countries. 10 years later, there is a lot more knowledge and it is much more granular. Maternal mortality has decreased by around 10%. 3/4 of all girls enroll in secondary school, which represent a 5% increase, and women's economic rights have improved. And there are more women than ever before in parliaments across the globe. We have one today as one of the speakers. The World Bank Group has invested significant resources in broadening the evidence base on determinants of and solutions to gender gaps at the country level. So I think the seminal report led to a whole lot of research and a collection of evidence base so that we can really focus on what are the most challenging problems, in particular gaps in access to economic opportunities, which is likely to be the most important area of gender inequality, together with social norms. However, as Mamta already mentioned also, progress has been slow in other important domains, and there are questions about whether and how results map from one context to another. Gender gaps remain in labor force participation and pay. Gender unequal social norms have proven difficult to change, as women and girls continue to be responsible for the bulk of care and domestic work. And women are still underrepresented in leadership positions in governments and private sector. And globally, violence against women and girls remain widespread. We are at a critical juncture. The COVID-19 crisis has compounded long-standing challenges for women and girls around the world. And a lot of what we have seen happen in the last 2 years shows that the impact of COVID has impacted women much more than men and exacerbated the large and persistent barriers to gender equality and intensified the co-occurring pandemic of violence against women and girls. The urgency of the crisis demands bold and comprehensive solutions, and it also presents an opportunity to build back better. Climate change, fragility, and conflict affect men and women and boys and girls differently, creating obstacles to gender equality and hindering progress and prosperity. So we really should focus on how policies can move beyond considerations of gender-based vulnerability towards empowering women and girls to contribute to increased community resilience. Today, we will hear from many inspiring experts who will share insights on how we can advance gender equality, even in the face of seemingly unprecedented obstacles. These are leaders who have leveraged their influence to enact positive change. Considering this context, as we launch the Accelerate Equality Initiative, we seek to look back, to understand what success we can build on, and of course, what lessons we have learned. And throughout the year, we will also look to the future. What are the new frontiers for gender equality? How can we work more effectively towards the empowerment of women, men, boys, and girls, and leverage their vast potential in a changing world? Finally, let me encourage you to continue to join us throughout this year, to contribute to the discussion and learn along with us on how we can really accelerate equality. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mari, for your excellent remarks and also for your leadership in our institution on gender issues. It's very much appreciated. I'm now going to turn to our fantastic panelists. I'm very pleased to welcome all of you to this very special event. As Mari said, we are launching our Accelerate Equality initiative today. Let me read out the names of our panelists in alphabetical order. First of all, we have Honorable Minister Zainab Ahmed, who's the Minister of Finance, Budget and National Planning of Nigeria. We then have Fareed Belhaj, who is our Vice President in the MENA region at the World Bank. Welcome. We have Ms. Anila Denaj, who is a current Member of Parliament and former Minister of Finance and Economy of Albania. Welcome. We have Minister Sri Mulyani Indrawati, who is the Minister of Finance of the Republic of Indonesia, and of course, a former Managing Director at the World Bank. Welcome, Minister Sri Mulyani. We have Deepa Narayan, who is an author, activist, and social scientist. She is battling COVID in her family in India, and she will join us for the second half of the event. We also have Stephen Puig, who is the CEO of Banco BHD Leon in the Dominican Republic. Welcome, Stephen. And finally, last but not least, we have Imam Hademin Oud Salek, Imam and Chief of Mahadra in the Ben Abbas Mosque in Mauritania. Welcome, sir. I had the pleasure to meet you last month, and I'm delighted that you are joining us today. So I'm going to go to the opening and framing question, and we're going to ask this of our former Managing Director, Minister Sri Mulyani, who was at the helm of our institution when we launched the World Development Report in 2012 on gender and development. So Minister Sri Mulyani, you were the Managing Director when we launched this report. What do you think it achieved? How do you feel that it helped bring gender equality into the center of the development policy dialogue? And if so, how? Over to you.
Thank you, Mamta. Very good morning to you in Washington, D.C. Here it's already a little bit night lit. I think we are all remember when we launched the WDR 2012 with a theme on gender equality. This has set at least recognition regarding a very important issue on development, that is the equality from the gender perspective. That report addressed 4 areas, which is very important and still continue very relevant today. That is reducing gender gap in human capital, especially on education and woman mortality. Closing gap in access to economic opportunity. This is especially important when we are talking about growth, quality of growth, and especially on productivity. The third theme is decreasing the gender differences in voice and agency, which Mari also mentioned earlier. And then the fourth area is limiting the reproduction of gender inequality. Since WDR 2012, we saw quite a lot of progress has been made globally and also in each country, but also this progress is still very uneven. Some countries make quite significant progress, whether this is in terms of legislation or in terms of their budget or policy that recognize a specific issue need to be addressed in order for us to be able to get the equality from the gender perspective. But other countries still lag behind, like Sub-Saharan Africa as well as South Asia. Since the 2012 WDR, we also saw a global movement, especially in the under the United Nations, when they launched Sustainable Development Goals, in which the gender equality put in the goal number 5, in which we want to achieve Sustainable Development Goal by 2030. It's a very ambitious one, 15 years. And if we look at the progress, this means that a lot of hard work still need to be done. Globally, in this case, with this WDR 2012, I think, as mentioned by Marie, a lot of progress has been made, especially in collecting data, providing evidence base that can provide also additional not only perspective but also convincing argument regarding importance of this gender equality. It is not only good in itself, morally right, but also economically smart. We see that this is going to gain quite a lot of traction when we see the benefit on the economic side and especially on the quality of life of the population. But we also see that the progress is still very, very slow. World Economic Forum 2021 showing that there is still 68% of average gender gap. And if we want to close this gap, it will require 135.6 years. That's still like very, very long way to go. And that's why we need more collaboration. If we reflect back what area that we could do more and what area in which we can learn each other. I think this is very important. Indonesia will use our role in this case to also promote this gender equality. For example, when we are now hosting the G20 as a presidency, we also promoting this on a Woman 20, but also in terms of the discussion that we are having and on the finance track as well as SERPA track. Indonesia also adopting this gender equality within our long-term development goal. And as a finance minister, I continue promote this while we are also at the same time providing a leadership so that we are going to be able to continue make a concrete progress. Gender-based budgeting has been promoted in Indonesia. We also, as a finance minister, which is usually also dominated by male worker, we also promote quite a lot of supporting for our women staff, including childcare, lactation, and also paternity leave. This is all very progressive if you consider within the context of global as well as Indonesia itself. We use our instrument in this case to promote gender, especially related to the economic opportunity. So most of the women labor force participation in the informal sector. So we use our program to provide capital access, especially for the informal sector and women player in this case. That has already reached quite a lot of traction at the very grassroots, which is very, very important. At the end, I will say that the WDR 2012 set at least tools as well as recognition of how important this gender equality if we want to achieve development goal. How important not only in terms of growth, but quality and equality. And we still need to do a lot of work. Legislation-wise, policy, tools that we can develop, and also learning each other in which we can actually promote this gender equality. Many of the gender equality related to norm, social norm, and values. And this cannot be done by promoting and saying that, oh, we are going to change. Usually you really need quite a lot of process of education, socialization, and even evidence-based. So these are all the areas that we still need to be done. Thank you, Mamta.
Thank you so much, Minister Sri Mulyani. I noted very carefully that you said the WDR made the case for gender equality. It continues to make the case in terms of the work, the research that it has unleashed. You also said that it generated some tools to help in the analysis, in making the case, and in reforming social norms. We will talk about all of these things in the next section, in particular as we focus on some of the remaining challenges. And to speak about some of the remaining challenges, I'm going to begin first with Stephen. Stephen, Sri Mulyani, in fact, just mentioned about the fact that many women are employed in the informal sector in small jobs with low productivity. This is a challenge if we want to close the gender wage gap, which is actually reflective of the fact that women are in small jobs with low productivity. So in your view, what do you feel have been some of the solutions in improving productivity of these small female-owned enterprises, and what can be done to raise the productivity and encourage an expansion and growing profitability of these enterprises? Over to you.
Thank you, Mamta, and good morning to everyone from the Dominican Republic here. This clustering around much smaller enterprises is certainly true in our country and in our region as well. When we look at the clustering here, it's 50% of micro enterprises are owned by women, 44% of smaller SMEs are owned by women, 33% of medium-sized SMEs are owned by women, and 22% of the larger SMEs here are owned by women. And if you go to larger corporates, well, the numbers continue to decline. I'll try to answer that in terms of our own sector, which is where we have the most experience. I think that one of the things that's helped over the last couple of decades has been the broadening definition of access to finance. If I think back to the early 2000s, when we talked about access to finance, we were focused primarily on microfinance. Our institution happens to be an institution that undertakes everything from microfinance all the way up to project finance. So we're active in microfinance. But one of the things that we realized about 8 or 9 years ago is that there's a great opportunity beyond microfinance. And that's something that when we started looking around on whom we could partner with, well, we partnered with IFC, but also we identified the Global Banking Alliance for Women, which had been formed in the 2000s to further access to finance for companies that were led by women that were larger and that were growing. So primarily SMEs, going a little bit beyond the micro level. And one thing that I've seen that's very interesting, and I've had the privilege to participate on the Global Banking Alliance's board over the last couple of years, is that we decided to change our name 2 years ago, and we're now the Financial Alliance for Women. So I think that we've moved in the last couple of decades from a focus on micro to banking in general, and now with the Financial Alliance for Women, we're focused also on insurance, we're focused also on fintechs, we're focused also on investment banks that could have initiatives that could impact access to finance on a much broader basis. So I think, to answer your question from our sector's point of view, I think this broadening definition of access to finance is something that helps those that are micro and that will be growing, and those that are a bit larger as well. I think that aside from access to finance, access to non-financial services has been key, at least in the program that we've developed and that we've seen other banks develop as well. And by this, I mean the ecosystems that we create to support our clients, i.e. provision of key services, such as good tax advice, good legal advice, things in which our clients may not necessarily be well-versed. We've partnered with universities in something that the government promoted here several years ago called the creation of SME centers, which are basically for training so that businesses can have a greater chance of success. We've bundled services, not only financial services, but also financial services with non-financial services for our customers. We promoted networking, which we understand is very important, not just from a commercial point of view, so that our customers can figure out whether they might have a good provider that may be women-led or a good customer that may be women-owned, but also in terms of simply sharing stories on how they've dealt with different aspects of running their businesses. And lastly, something that has worked for us in terms of non-financial products or services has been access to a web portal where our women-led businesses can offer the products and services that they provide. The third thing that I would mention that I think is useful in terms of providing inputs from our sector that can help these businesses grow is simply the raising public-private awareness of what can be done in terms of the gender gap. And I think that the World Economic Foundation's initiative, the Gender Parity Accelerator, which is something which is under gestation in our country here, has helped bring together not just banks, but also other companies to discuss what can be done, what needs to be done, and to figure out what opportunities exist for the future. So, in our initial discussions, things that we focused on here have been procurement policies, both public and private. Access to data. Data is key. In our own sector, we see a great opportunity for authorities to mandate that we provide gender disaggregated data so that not just ourselves, I mean, we do it ourselves because we're focused on this, but so other players will realize the kinds of opportunities that exist when you can look at gender disaggregated data in terms of your clients. And that information is very revealing. In our region, there are countries that have mandated it for years, such as Chile. And I think it's something that can be done in many other places as well. It's something that's still in the works here. And lastly, and obviously, I think training, i.e. education, reskilling, upskilling, is at that public-private divide, where we need to figure out and be on top of what the private sector is actually demanding, and the public sector can certainly help in developing that. If I think of larger companies, I think that something that's key is linking a gender focus to the governance of larger companies. And by this, I mean the common purpose. If I look at our common purpose is very simple. It's to promote human development by offering banking services that are close to our customers, that are responsible, and that are innovative. And how can you do that if you exclude half of your customers? So, it ties it in. Once you relate it to what your common purpose is in a larger company, I think that's something that helps permeate the organization and make sure that everybody has this at least in mind in everything that we do. And if you bring it to a governance level, then obviously you're also thinking about what you have, the level of representation you have at your board of directors, and from there on down. And you also think about business cases as well, which I think is key for the private sector, to have a good business case to really motivate what you're doing in terms of gender parity, which is something that has really driven what we do, and is something that we learned through the IFC. That's key. If you're not going to be the flavor of the month or of the year or 2 or 3 years, you really have to have a business case behind what you're doing to focus on gender.
Thank you so much, Stephen. That was a very rich and comprehensive response, and I took a lot of notes. You talked about the expansion of financial services, but also non-financial services, training for these small entrepreneurs. But you broadened the conversation and talked about awareness raising and making sure that it's everybody's business. Everybody realizes that this is important to development impact. So thank you very much for that. I want to move on to the very important question of social norms, which often get in the way of women taking advantage of the services that are available. And in this context, I want to bring in Imam Hademin. Imam, you are a community leader, and you have played a very important role in helping address gender norms in your community, particularly those that relate to early marriage and early childbearing, which often get in the way of women's economic opportunities and voice. So can we learn from you on what are some of the things that you feel have been effective in addressing gender norms that women are confronted with? Over to you.
أهلا وسهلا. مرحبا.
Hello and good morning, good afternoon. I'd like to thank you for giving me the opportunity to participate in this important event, and I hope to see you here in Nouakchott soon, as we met before. Thank you very much for this opportunity. At the outset, I would like to give you the good news that the rate of development and advancement in terms of achieving gender equality and achieving prosperity for women and children, as well as getting rid of many negative customs that have led to children falling sick and maternal mortality. So we are moving away from a reality that was there tens of years ago, where the woman was not present at all from all the spheres. They were absent from all the spheres, and this has nothing to do with culture or religion or anything, especially in some areas of Africa. There are so many pains that the women are suffering from. There are a great deal of efforts that need still to be made, and I'm optimistic that we are very close, by the will of God, from achieving this breaching this gender equality gap and achieving equality. We are unable to reach certain goals at this point. However, with this cooperation, with the grace of God, we are now able to reach areas that before we were not able to reach. I think we were before right now. We are better off right now than we were before, and we are better equipped to talk to the people, especially in the areas of child marriage. And this was a big problem a long time ago, and now it is being discussed. Some of the activists and some women are now convinced that the child marriage is only contain negative effects for the girl, because she gets married and then gets pregnant at an early age, which is a child herself. And we have several cases of young girls who died because of early pregnancy. These statistics that are given to us by the health authorities, and this helped us convince a great deal of people who are really holding on to these negative customs, harmful customs. And I believe that we can speed up the rate of achieving these goals. So if we could cooperate and convince all the religious leaders and the people in general, there are some people who still represent a hurdle for us. Even in communities, in women communities now are mostly convinced that things need to be changed. However, there is a minority that still holds on to old beliefs, and we need to continue to work with them so that we can uproot these harmful practices from our societies, especially in these countries where the project is working on. I told you before that we are able to, we are ready to work with them, and I'm very optimistic in reality that we will get rid of these traditional harmful practices that some people still want to hold on to, and some traditional men and some societies are still holding on to.
Thank you so much, Imam Hademin. You've emphasized that it's very important for people to use their voice, both men and women, and community leaders to use their voice to speak out about the need to change social norms. This is a very important point. You also talked about how women themselves need to advocate for change, and I couldn't agree with you more. I want to move us on to another issue which gets in the way of women's economic opportunities, and that has to do with violence against women and girls. And I'd like to bring in Ms. Denaj on this issue. We know that women all over the world suffer from physical and sexual violence. And unfortunately, COVID-19 has made things worse. Mr. Naj, I'd like you to draw upon your own experience in government and share with us, what do you feel has been successful in helping curb domestic violence, and what lessons would you highlight from your own experience that can support an end to this practice?
Thank you, Mamta. Good morning and good afternoon to everyone. And thank you very much for the opportunity to share the experience of Albania. Violence against women and girls continues to prevail in Albania. In 2019, it was reported that more than half of women and girls aged 15 to 74 years old had experienced one or more forms of violence during their lifetime. The spectrum of violence is wide, including intimate partner violence, dating violence, non-partner violence, sexual harassment. Gender-based violence is not only widespread, but as also mentioned earlier, it is also accepted by some social norms, in particularly in rural areas. Findings from the same sources above reveal that 1 in 2 women believe that violence between a husband and a wife is a private matter, that the woman should tolerate some violence to keep her family together, that the woman is partially to blame if her husband beats her. These social norms influence women to stay in an abusive relationship and not report crimes to the relevant authorities and mechanisms that during the years had been built and strengthened more. Enormous efforts are made in continuation towards legislation. The 2021-2030 National Strategy on Gender Equality, which is the 4th of its kind in Albania, focuses on the objectives of the government program on gender equality. Its main pillars are prevention and support to the victims of violence, particularly those coming from the disadvantaged groups of women. It is expected that for this strategy, the contribution from the state budget will cover up to 50.5%. And I want to point out here one point. If government do not put an emphasis on a budget support, these programs normally will take more time. And government of Albania during the last 8 years had put a lot of emphasis both in legislation upgrade, but also budget support, as we will see a bit later. Furthermore, the social fund mechanism became functional in 2019. Providing the opportunity to 14 municipalities, and I want to be very, very specific here. A lot of work has to be done in the local government, a part of the central government. About 700,000 euros were granted to 14 municipalities to provide emergency service to women victims of violence or domestic violence. The government adopted legislation pursuant to the law on social enterprises, according to which an enterprise support fund in a total sum of about 2.8 million euro for the period 2019-2021 was granted in particular to create new jobs, to cover the mandatory social and health insurance payments for employees of social enterprises belonging to disadvantaged groups, and for startups, which is a very key component for the further economical empowerment of victims or women in general. The Ministry of Justice also has allocated funds for free legal aid for women and girls in need. Gender-responsive budget, as I mentioned earlier, both at the central and the local government is key and is considered a paramount importance by the government during the last 9 years. In 2021, there were 41 budgetary programs on gender response, coming from 1% in 2013. So we moved from 1 to 41 programs. And the budget of the budget supporting the gender response is 9% of the total state budget from 1% in 2013. So as I mentioned, a lot of focus of government, it's very key to accelerate this process. Second, and very important, is the structure, the bodies, the government, and mechanism to lead and coordinate efforts. Since 2017, we have the National Council on Gender Equality, the Parliamentary Subcommittee on Gender Equality and Preventing Violence Against Women, and the Office for Coordinating and Fight Against Domestic Violence. And the coordination of these bodies goes as high as the Deputy Prime Minister. Definitely of high importance is the role and partnership with civil society, which I think in Albania is a very important coordination between different actors of government with the social society. This organization also have an active presence in advisory and monitoring bodies. Online platforms have been set up from these organizations, counseling line for women and girls platforms, which are necessary for help on legal assistance and advice online, because sometimes physical is not possible, not only because of COVID, but also because of, as I mentioned, social norms. Just to give you some figures, in 2020, it is recorded that 5,597 phone calls were recorded, out of which support to court procedures were given for 750 cases. Still, a lot have to be done, and the Commissioner for Protection and Against Discriminations has a very key role in this. But I really want to thank and stop here to thank the institutions, particularly UN agencies, because they have been of paramount support in coordinating referral mechanism. We look forward to further increased collaboration between many actors and make our strategy a vivid process and a more sustainable process in the near future. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ms. Danaj. Again, a very rich response. You touched upon the role of social norms that condone gender-based violence and the need to change that. You talked about the importance of public services. You talked about a budget that is responsive to gender needs. You talked about the role of local government and civil society, and also the role of international organizations and UN agencies. So there was a lot in that. Very much appreciate what you said. Many of these things, especially as they relate to public finance, we're going to take up in our next section. But before that, we are going to show a short video that has been specially prepared for this event. So we're going to turn to the video now, and then we're going to talk a little bit about public finance.
Over the past decade, the world has progressed towards greater gender equality. Maternal mortality has decreased 10%. 3 out of 5 girls are enrolled in secondary school. Women's economic rights have improved. This provides benefits for everyone. However, much more remains to be done, and COVID-19 has exacerbated the disparity. Female students are less likely to return to school due to the propensity of gender violence, early marriage, child and home care responsibilities. Women have also been more likely to lose their jobs than men due to a higher concentration of employment in informal sectors. At current trends, it will take over 100 years to achieve gender equality across economic and public spheres. To reverse losses and accelerate equality, we should support countries to make efforts to encourage women to participate in the workforce, ensure economic opportunities, including digital and financial inclusion for women, enact more equitable policies around child and elder care in the home, tackle the scourge of violence against women and girls. 1 in 3 women and girls experience violence in their lifetime. Holistic solutions required to close the most stubborn gender gaps will depend on dedicated efforts from all of us. To this end, the World Bank Group is strengthening partnerships with diverse stakeholders. Putting women and girls at the center of recovery efforts from COVID-19 will help catalyze a stronger recovery. Building on the evidence and the momentum, now is the time to accelerate action towards gender equality together.
Following that video that was specially prepared for for launching our Accelerate Equality initiative, I now want to take up this issue of public finance. Both Minister Sri Mulyani and Ms. Danaj talked about the importance of public resources and gender-sensitive budgeting. My first question is going to be to Honorable Minister Ahmed. Minister Ahmed, I hope, yes, I see you. I didn't see you earlier. So delighted that you could join us. We know that government debt levels have surged because of COVID-19 and fiscal pressures have intensified. As a Minister of Finance and as a leader amongst your peers, how would you advise ministers of finance to mobilize revenue and also prioritize spending in a gender-sensitive way? Over to you, Minister Ahmad.
Thank you very much, Martha. Let me say good afternoon and Happy New Year to all the distinguished panelists in this discussion. So, Martha, the fact is, globally, we are now at a very important crossroad. And when it comes to gender equality and development, the issues we have further been exacerbated by the COVID-19 crisis. The data is resoundingly clear. Gender equality is a key driver of economic growth anywhere in the world. And it also improves development outcomes, ultimately leading to improved resilience and greater social inclusion. It is the economic and social empowerment of women and girls that is critical for us in developing countries now to see as one very quick pathway to build back better. Funding and gender-sensitive fiscal policies are also critical, but so also is credible disaggregated data and impact monitoring as well as evaluation. However, many countries are contending with increased fiscal constraints, including my country. It is important, therefore, for ministers of finance to consider comprehensive gender mainstreaming across fiscal policy and public financial management. The approach would, of course, vary from country to country and could include a coordinated mix of relevant interventions, including gender-responsive budgeting, gender-responsive financial instruments, a strategic focus on gender disaggregated data collection and analysis, as well as gender-responsive financing frameworks. In Nigeria, we're taking a holistic approach, and we're scaling existing and developing new interventions that are at the intersection of gender and fiscal policy with public financial management. This approach presents a critical paradigm shift for us towards systemic and scalable reforms, and also leverages on the coordination benefits of having the Ministry of Finance, Budget, and National Planning functions encapsulated in one place. And for us, this is a first in Nigeria's history. So on gender-responsive budgeting, recognizing the critical importance of equitable budget allocation and implementation, we have formally introduced a gender lens to our national budgets with an express provision that we made specifically for the 2022 budget using a gender-responsive budgeting framework. We had prepared the 2022 budget. This step was taken following a series of stakeholder consultations that we conducted with support from the International Monetary Fund, the IMF. We also have currently capacity building for the Budget Office of the Federation and other government agencies on the implementation of the gender-responsive budgeting provisions, with an initial focus on sectors that are critical to human capital development, specifically health, education, and humanitarian affairs and social development. On gender-responsive fiscal package, fiscal stimulus package, another area that we have made some progress, and we had support here from the UN Women. They supported our review of the Nigeria's fiscal stimulus package following the COVID-19 pandemic. The 2.3 trillion naira COVID-19 fiscal package had referenced GDP data from our Bureau of Statistics and recognizes the critical role played by the ESP for Nigeria's swift exit from recession. So this ESP, the Economic Sustainability Plan, had express programs for women and for girls, as well as several institutional provisions which will ensure gender responsiveness to the COVID-19 recovery. Recommendations that were made include the use of gender disaggregated data to enhance tracking and impact monitoring, and also to be able to explore the existing data that we have in our National Bureau of Statistics for the COVID response, but also for our general national development planning and policy and implementation. And the third part is on the development of gender responsive integrated national financing framework. And this we started since 2019, actually December 2019. We initiated the development of a Nigerian integrated national financing framework, and we formed the steering committee, and the membership of the steering committee included the World Bank. The INFF is a United Nations tool that is designed to help countries strengthen planning processes to overcome existing impediments to financing sustainable development to enable us reach the goals of the SDGs. So operationalizing the INFF for sustainable development in Nigeria has helped us to strengthen our national and state planning processes and strategically helped us to identify and mobilize resources that are required to finance our development plans in order for us to build back better post-COVID-19. We're also committed to ensuring that the INFF is gender responsive all through the implementation period. I'd like to stop here, Mantha, at this time. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Minister Ahmed. You have shown great leadership in terms of making the budget of Nigeria more sensitive to gender issues. I heard two very important things in addition in what you said. One is having a framework through which to look at the budget so that it is responsive to the needs of women and girls. And the second is to continuously build the evidence and have the data that supports this budget process. So thank you very much for those insights. Sticking to public finance, I now want to turn to Farid, who is our Vice President of the MENA region at the World Bank. Farid, you have a responsibility when you talk to country authorities and need to make the case that public finance needs to be responsive to gender issues. Can you share with us your insights and your experiences in how you do this and what you have found to be effective? Over to you, Farid.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mamta. It's, first of all, Happy New Year to everybody. And it's such a pleasure to be in this distinguished panel with a number of colleagues and friends around the world. Let me first say on the personal side, the launch of the WDR 2012 was quite a unforgettable experience for me. I was in the Pacific at the time, and launching it in all of those small states of the Pacific was really very important and quite a challenge there and anywhere else, how to translate those findings and recommendations into actual action on the ground. And this is really the big challenge. And coming to your question, yes, there are many competing priorities, but when it comes to addressing gender gaps, this is not an afterthought in the Middle East and North Africa, and this is not a subsidiary agenda. What we have done over the last 18 months in terms of actual financing, and of course, we cannot finance without having a very strong, heavy, substantive dialogue with with your counterparts. We have delivered over the last 18 months $5.4 billion in new commitments to address specifically the impact of COVID-19, of course, in MENA, but also making sure that in each one of those engagement, new commitments, operations, that gender dimension is at the center of everybody's preoccupation. As Marie mentioned, as Shrimulani mentioned, this is smart, but it is also, frankly, absolutely, unavoidable. How can you move forward in any operation without, including that dimension? I'll give you a few examples just to make sure that, the translation into reality, gets understood. For instance, to address a lower vaccination uptake among women, our response projects in Tunisia, in Yemen, we have leveraged female-led NGOs for information sharing and use mobile clinics staffed by women to address high vulnerability and female-headed household. Cash transfer programs in Lebanon, Jordan, Palestine, West Bank and Gaza, we have targeted female-headed households to improve women's access to employment opportunities. We just had, going to the board, the Jordan Support Private Sector Employment and Skills, which includes a series of actions, specific actions, to address all those constraints that women can find. For instance, transportation subsidies, outreach for sectors employing a larger share of women. To support women-owned businesses in a place where things may not necessarily seem as obvious as one would like them to be. In Gaza, for instance, our rapid response grant program supported qualified startups and small and medium enterprises directly hit by the downturn. 1/3 of those were managed by women. Now, an issue that is really important is, we need to have, and we have adopted a two-pronged approach. One is to deal with the emergency of things, and this is what I've just outlined. But also there is a medium and longer term conversation. And this is where our engagement when it comes to policy reforms becomes important, but also in terms of addressing the social norms. I was extremely happy to hear the colleagues, Imam Hadmin, for instance, mentioning the social norms. Our colleagues from Albania mentioning that as well. It is fundamental to move on those. And let me tell you something. We are in international institutions, we have our values, and our values are global values. And we have to push our agenda, and the agenda that has a lot to do with empowering women economically, socially, but also making sure that there is a legal framework that would make sure that that empowerment is sustained over time and does not get challenged every now and then. So it is very important that we keep pushing that agenda, through the economic side, through the cultural side, but also very, very much through the legal framework that we need to help those countries put together and, of course, adhere to. Thank you so much, and I think it's a really great agenda that we're pushing today, at the 10th anniversary of the WDR. Thank you so much, Mamta.
Thank you, Fareed, for those very inspiring words. I really appreciate what you said, that how can we engage in any dialogue, in any operation, without recognizing the value of gender in achieving the development outcomes. To me, that's a very powerful statement. Also, the rich insights you have into the social norms question, requiring both the cultural side, but also the legislative side. Both need to go hand in hand. That's a very good and useful insight. We've talked about remaining challenges in economic opportunities, in addressing social norms. We've also talked about gender-based violence. We talked about some of the tools in terms of the role of government and public finance in addressing these challenges. I want to now turn us to something that we have not spoken about as much, which is partnerships, the importance of partnerships in addressing gender inequality. And I'm going to ask a rapid round of questions to 4 of our panelists on this issue of partnerships. I'm going to begin with Ms. Denaj. Anila, building on what you've just heard, I would very much like to hear from you how you have been successful, how your government has been successful in bringing in a wide range of stakeholders into the national strategy to address gender inequality. What are the insights from this experience?
Thank you again. As I mentioned earlier, is first of all the focus that government has placed from the very beginning in 2013 with budget support and with all the instruments in governance. We have considered that women's lack of representation in business in Albania limit 20% of the GDP growth each year. And definitely, in order to reach a sustainable fight against violence and also the support towards gender equality, we need to empower women in being more independent economically. And as I mentioned earlier, also to reach to a higher growth level of GDP. Thus, many actors are connected because it's business, it's government institutions like ministries, it's civil society, it's education. And we also believe that through education we can reach quite a lot of success. But during all this process, I want to highlight the support of technical assistance in supporting us with the upgrade of our legislation, which I think is the key route in every progress of this journey. And the legislation had improved considerably. That puts a lot of emphasis for many actors to play its role accordingly, but also not only locally, but also international standards, and require permanent follow-up on how results have been achieved. We have come very close to a very good collaboration between many actors, due a lot of support of line ministry, and particularly for violence is the Ministry of Health, but also Ministry of Economy is putting a lot of support because of public education, in professional education in particular in rural areas. Particularly for people living in rural areas, it's important that we support business representative because 42% of people in Albania live in rural areas. And of course, women empowerment there is very key. So just to conclude, I think it's focus of government. And as you mentioned, it has to be everybody's life. It has to be lived. From civil society to government to media to all the actors, because we'll be much better off as society and, as I mentioned, in the economical terms, if we lead the same that is now currently true in Albania. Women representative government is the top list in the world, I think. We have 12 ministers out of 17 or 33% in parliament, but it has to be reached also in business, and where we lag behind considerably. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Anila. So you're saying focus from the national authorities to bring everybody along, and very important to bring the private sector into the picture. I'm going to ask the same question to Fareed. So Fareed, over the last 10 years, the World Bank group has relied on many partnerships to support gender equality. In your experience, which have been successful and why have they been successful? Can you draw on your experience and enlighten us? Thank you.
Yes, look, I would say that you had two kinds of partnerships. One is locally, and without that local partnership, we cannot do anything. We are not going to be parachuting new values, new ways, without having a strong local ownership of it. And that is not, if I may say, instant coffee. That doesn't happen overnight. You need to work on it, and that's where having our colleagues on the ground and engaging on a daily basis is absolutely fundamental. What you have done, for instance, recent trip to the Sahel and in Mauritania, and having that engagement there is part of it. It is really what we should be all doing at all times. Gender-based violence, for us in MENA, we see it as a shadow crisis. In addition to the COVID-19 crisis, we have that GBV crisis. It is there. And we need to make sure that we keep it very much on top of our priorities. Now, we have put together a few initiatives. One is, as I was mentioning earlier, how to translate discussions and strategies into reality. We just went 2-3 months ago to the board of directors of the World Bank with a large engagement with Egypt. A large engagement with Egypt that included a very, very important gender violence and gender empowerment dimension. And that was not done by the World Bank. It was done in response to a very important, ground-based initiative from, Egyptian women, the Egyptian Women's Association. ladies and men who believe in that agenda. And we were able to push it and to translate into law, a number of initiatives that were still, sitting here or there. On other dimensions, we were able to engage with international partners also to help us move forward. For instance, in the Mashrek Gender Facility that we have constructed over the last couple of years. This is a joint IFC World Bank initiative. It aims at engaging or enlarging, let's say, women's labor force participation and pushing back, gender-based violence in Iraq, in Jordan, in Lebanon. This was supported by Canada, supported by Norway, and that too has proved to be a very important way of going about this agenda. But let me again insist, nothing can be done without having our, call them champions, sitting in the field and pushing that agenda, so that our engagement coming from outside, if I may, will collide positively with that priority that those homegrown associations are putting on the table. We help them strengthen their hand, and they help us. They help us because we learn so much from what they do, and we can, by learning from what they do, transfer that kind of knowledge into other places. Of course, making sure that we custom fit it to the realities on the ground. So there is this just one. It's not a one-way street. It's really an exchange of information and an exchange of goodwill all across.
Thank you. So it's very strong local partnerships, and I like this idea that you have a positive collision between international partnerships and local partnerships. That's a very nice way of putting it. I'm going to move us on to Minister Ahmed and hear from her on her experience in building partnerships around gender-based budgeting and support for women's issues.
Well,
Minister Ahmed.
Thank you again, ma'am. I hope you can hear me. In Nigeria, we do have a clear leadership across government. So there's a unanimous understanding and agreement that there must be gender equity across all levels of government. But I wish we have made progress like the example that Anila made. If we have some legislations that actually make provisions to drive some of the key policy and governance decisions that we have taken. For example, even from the elections from the lowest level right across to the national level, right?
Minister Ahmed, I've lost you. I assume it's not just me.
Hello?
Yes, you're back. Excellent.
Yes. So I was saying
I lost you when you said that you were hoping that there was as much progress as Anila was talking about you talked about the electoral process. Yes.
Using legislation, using the electoral process to be able to bring up more women in leadership positions. While we have more women featuring on the side of the executive, on the legislative side, from the local governments to states to the national level, the numbers are still very, very small. So there's a lot of work that is going on. There's a constitutional review process, which we're trying to take advantage of to see whether we can have some laws that actually legislate the proportion of women in some key leadership positions. But having said that, I must also say we've been able to leverage the fact that for the first time, the ministry that I lead right now is having the function of both planning, budgeting, as well as finance. And it does help in terms of being able to coordinate activities in a manner that is more holistic to make sure that the combined agencies that we supervise, as well as the whole of government, actually has some emphasis on gender, some focus on gender across fiscal as well as public financial management. In terms of partnerships, I do agree that partnerships should be driven, first of all, locally, and we do have quite a number of non-governmental organizations that are driving gender more particularly, working in partnership with development partners. Partnership has been critical immensely with collaboration, with the collaboration work between us and World Bank, as well as the UN system, specifically the UN Women and the UNDP in Nigeria. We also have some very significant support from was invited to join an event. It's an amazing
I've lost you again, Minister Ahmed.
Hello.
You were invited to join an event and then I lost you.
I joined the World Bank Advisory Council on Gender and Development, and we see it as an amazing opportunity to be able to share as well as to learn, not only from the banks, but also from the members that are at the council. It's helping us to think through and shape the future strategies that we must adopt for gender equality and enhanced development to ensure that the development that we seek to achieve is inclusive and sensitive to the needs of women and girls.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And I appreciate your persisting despite some of the technical issues. The final person I want to bring in on this issue of partnerships is Stephen. And I want to go to you, Stephen. You spoke very eloquently earlier about making gender equality the business of everyone, and so that it permeates through all branches of finance, and I guess outside finance as well. But can we hear a little more from you on whether there are solutions that you are aware of, approaches to partnerships that you are aware of that can better support the participation of women, particularly in employment and in higher productivity sectors? Over to you, Stephen.
Thank you, Mamta. I think partnerships have been a key element of the program that we've been able to develop. As a matter of fact, whenever I do a presentation on what we've done, I always have a slide which is specifically on partnerships. And in our case, when we took a look around to try to figure out what we could actually do, we identified the gender finance team at IFC. That was one of the first doors we knocked on, and we actually hired them. This was out of pocket. This was not pro bono. And we hired the team for 1 year to help develop our program about 8 years ago. And we also noticed the Global Banking Alliance for Women, and we were keen to be the first member bank from our country and one of the first in our region, actually. I think at the time there were only 5 from Latin America that were members of what was then called the GBA. So those were key partnerships. The minister mentioned UN Women. We also sought out UN Women and actually had a close relationship from the outset with the UN as well. And over time, what we've seen is that partnerships have been key not only for this, but I'm in banking, and in banking, digital transformation is everything right now. Digital transformation involves new alliances, more partnerships, and this has been true. I mean, not just for our gender parity initiative, but also for what we're doing in our business in general. So there have been other partnerships as well. I mentioned the university centers, which are called Centros Pymes or SME centers. We were the first bank to decide to partner with these, and we've partnered with 4 to cover essentially 4 corners of our country to make sure that we're accessing SMEs in these regions within our country. And other multilaterals have been important as well. We've worked with the IDB in our region. And I think that there are other partnerships that are worth mentioning as well. Obviously, different ministries within the government here. We've worked with the Ministry for Women here. Now that the Gender Parity Initiative is being developed, or the Gender Parity Accelerator is being developed here, this is something that's being spearheaded by the Social Cabinet and the President of the country. Again, it's still under gestation. It hasn't been launched, but we've been in a number of preliminary meetings, and that's an important partnership going forward. And then also, we've partnered with the procurement division of the government as well to work on what we can do in terms of SMEs and procurement that the government secures with our customers, and the Ministry of Commerce and Industry here as well, in terms of our initiatives also. So I would say that over the last 9 years, when we've had our initiative, we've partnered with many third parties to do what we've done until now. And lastly, I would mention external certifications. Last year, we got our initial EDGE certification. EDGE is based in Switzerland. We see them as a key partner going forward as well, to have very transparent stock taking of where we are in terms of parity within the organization, that which is something that we need to share with our own folks periodically.
Thank you, Stephen. That was really very helpful. This brings us to the last and final session of our event this morning. After we've talked about the outstanding challenges, the role of government and public finance, the role of partnerships, we now have to bring it together and think about what does this mean for what the World Bank should focus on as it thinks about its new gender strategy post in this period that takes us beyond 10 years since the WDR. And for this last session, I'm going to turn to three speakers to give us the benefit of their wisdom. I'm going to first start with Minister Sri Mulyani. I'm going to go back to her. We started with you, Minister Sri Mulyani. As a Minister of Finance and as an international development leader, and as somebody who knows the World Bank Group, I would like to ask you what role you would see for international development partners and for the World Bank Group in particular in this as we look forward. What should we focus on to promote gender equality and women's empowerment? And perhaps, if I may, what should we do differently? Over to you, Minister Sri Mulyani. You're muted.
Sorry. Thank you, Mamta. If we talk about the international institution like World Bank, we all know you have three very important power or influence. First is cost financing, which you can translate it into programs supporting many developing countries. Second one is the knowledge, in which the World Bank can collect as well as then disseminate knowledge, including technical assistance to many of the country, which in this case, when we talk about gender, that means that you can explore more or even support many countries in terms of gender data, because if you cannot measure, if there is no evidence that can be presented in a convincing way, I think that's going to be also less persuasive, that can also bring the change that we want. So knowledge, data, and how you present it, I think it's very, very important. The third one is the convening power, which you are now doing and continue doing it. What you could do in a better and different way. I think what I don't hear much in this conversation, although I heard from Stephen, is the role of the digital technology, and especially that we are dealing with many millennial generation, the younger generation, which is more tech savvy, and they are also more confident, have more ambition. So in this case, the way that you are going to use these three very important and powerful sources, that is financing, knowledge, as well as convening, can be combined with the digital technology. I myself, in this case, listening to the previous conversation regarding the partnership, I will give you some of the very concrete example. I think we've talked about the gender budgeting. As a finance minister, we did that. We also design, for example, like policy, when we do the social safety net. This is also implemented with the gender lens, in which the recipient are all women. We also provide quite a lot of support for small, medium enterprises, informal sector, especially women. But these are all what we've already done. How we are going to be more powerful in terms of providing impact. And the role of digital technology is very important. First, Mamta, my own, in the cabinet, we have 6 ministers. Uniquely in Indonesia, I'm in the finance minister, which is traditionally always a male. And then second one, the first time in Indonesia, the foreign minister is also a woman. Happened to be, she is my classmate. So when we both together come up in a social media, Instagram, Facebook, and then seeing the 2 minister women together, and we sometimes also showing our own personal family life, this can be a very powerful role model for many women, girls in Indonesia, that you actually can achieve your career as well as your family, work-life balance, and also a very powerful using this powerful social media. And this also in Indonesia, we have some of date, which is celebrated as a gender equality, in which we have a heroine, a champion back in 19th century. So we use that kind of momentum in which we celebrated this equality. Even back before Indonesia was independent, we've already strived for this equality. So use this kind of approach, which is totally different. Rather than maybe a very dry statistical evidence base, you provide it in a very powerful lifestyle or a very powerful, real concrete role. I think that's going to be very, very important. And you, in this case, the World Bank, as an institution which is operate globally, definitely can use that, what you call it, brand, as well as power, convening power, in a much more creative way. That is my thinking. The second one, as I said, evidence-based data analytic is very important. Many of the younger generation is also very, very, what you call it, into this digital analytic, data analytic. So if we are going to be able to present more on this, the gender dimension in anything, from the policy perspective, social implementation, because when you have this kind of evidence presented and also owned by the younger generation, they then can see that, oh, this is important, how to correct that. Then the World Bank can come up with, oh, this is how you can address this issue. This is going to be a very powerful partnership in terms of the recognition, ownership, and how you understand the data. And then you can provide this kind of design of the policy that you can learn from many countries in the world, which is already very successful, including what just mentioned by Anila and others about legislation. You can actually, this legislation can only be accelerated when the population believe that we need to change. Then all the legislator will think, oh, okay, we have to change because they are representing the people, right? So these are also very, very important. And that is something that I think is going to be very, very critical for this kind of partnership. World Bank with the 3 very powerful sources of knowledge, finance, and convening, and then combined with this kind of movement coming, especially from the younger generation, millennial, with this digital technology. The third, I think I heard from Imam Hadamin, Indonesia is also a Muslim country. We have, for example, our Imam of our Istiqlal Mosque. This is the national mosque, the biggest mosque in Indonesia. And he's also a very is a champion in the gender equality. So he talked to me and said, could you provide support on how we are going to have a more women to become somebody who preach. So usually the preacher is more male dominated also. But if you have more women in which they also have the understanding of the religious values and at the same time also presenting with this dimension, I think that can make a real a lot of difference. So that kind of thing is going to be something that is create a game changer. Also, Minister of Education in Indonesia, we have the Minister of Education is the owners, the founder of Gojek. This is again a very high profile digital company in Indonesia. So people look, younger generation look at him as a successful one. And when he talked as a male minister, talking a lot about gender, that really bring quite a lot of powerful influence. Minister of State-owned enterprise, again, this is male minister, but he believed in this promoting gender equality. So he said that all state-owned enterprises in Indonesia should have this at least 30% women on the board. He promoted the younger generation. So this kind of what we call it the partnership, but also in this case, the power of real concrete action that then create quite a lot of what you call it idea as well as inspiration for many, especially for the younger generation. I think this kind of thing need to be explored more by the World Bank. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister Sri Mulyani. Those are very good thoughts, and we welcome them very much. I want to give two more panelists a chance to reflect on how the World Bank should move forward. One of them you just referred to. I'd like to bring Imam Hamedin back to the center stage and ask him. Ask you, Imam Hamedin, what role do you expect from international partners such as the World Bank to support gender equality, and what would you like to see us doing to further support transformative change, which we know will involve community leaders like yourself, men and women?
Thank you very much, my sister. Before I answer these questions, I would like to discuss or identify three terms that were used: equality, violence. In terms of the equality, as a religious person, I would like to say that Islam has created or established a total equality between men and women. They have to have the same salary, and there is no distinction in government and spheres between women and men in terms of the social and economic roles. There is comprehensive and there is complementarity between men and women, so that the government, so that the society would be productive and the most productive possible. In terms of violence, our Prophet Muhammad, peace and prayer be upon him, said that God is merciful and like mercy, and is against any violence. If there is wherever there is mercy, there is goodness, and wherever there is violence, there is evil. So we have to be merciful towards the marginalized portions of our society, including women and girls. In terms of the terms, the third term, which is empowerment, I would like to ask you, we are talking about equality and empowerment of women. I would like to add the empowerment of religious leaders so that they can work and that they can speak directly to people and change the mentalities. Many Muslim religious leaders, many religious leaders and Muslims in particular must be able to speak directly to society in order to eradicate these erroneous and harmful social norms. This is what I'd like to say in terms of empowerment. In terms of the first question, there are things that the World Bank must not do or must do in terms of moving forward with the development and the gender equality. The World Bank must work directly with the religious institutions to empower them so that they can speak to people and to make this change happen. The question about the governments and what governments must do, you, the World Bank, are partners with the governments. You have to implement more pressure on them so that they can listen to their youth.
Their own people.
So there are governments that have a great deal of opportunities, but they waste their opportunities and they don't give the opportunity to the youth. So we need to push them to enable or enact legislations that are in favor of women. The Indonesian minister reminded me of another key aspect, which is what we call the guides or female guides. This is not new. Aisha, the Prophet's wife, has listened and learned many things from the companions of the Prophet, and so she was a guide. She was a female guide, and there's another companion of the Prophet who was a female, and she participated with him in meetings and in battles, and she was with him as a counselor, and she provided advisory services for women in terms of medical expertise and things of that sort. So this is part of the role that the woman used to practice at that time. There are customs or harmful customs that came and harmed women and harmed societies. These customs and habits have nothing to do with Islam, and we need to eradicate them, and we have to work with you by the will of God. And we are ready now to help the government to get rid of these harmful practices and to help the World Bank reach this social equality through partnership. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Imam Hamedin, both for the terms, explication of the terms, and for your thoughts on how the World Bank where the World Bank can focus in the coming years. We're a little over time, but we have Deepa Narayan who has joined us. So I would like to give her a few minutes. Deepa, thank you so much for joining us. You have been a stalwart of support for gender equality. We've talked a little bit about social norms. I'd like to ask you two questions, and I'd appreciate it if you could respond briefly because we're out of time. First of all, in your experience, what has worked in addressing some of the social norms that hold women back? And that's my first question. My second question is, where would you like to see the World Bank focus in its efforts to further support gender equality in the coming 10 years? Over to you, Deepa.
Thank you, Mamta. It's a pleasure to be back after so many years. I think it's interesting in this discussion so far, even though I was late, because I have COVID as well as I've been taking care of my mother who's very ill. So the care responsibilities of women are always nearby. I haven't heard the word patriarchy. And I think it's really important. It's a word that I've avoided in the past because when we talk about social norms, it's patriarchy or the belief that men are superior to women that really is the core of of social norms. And we're not talking about one social norms. These social norms, there are hundreds of social norms which are all interrelated, and just changing one social norm doesn't transform gender relations, and it certainly doesn't transform power relations. And I'm bringing up power because it's been explicitly mentioned in the WDR 2000 that that is the goal. Secondly, as has been already mentioned, is that these are all culture specific. And so it's impossible for me to talk about specific programs, but I'll highlight 3 principles, and these end up being feminist principles that are important in programs that have worked across countries. The first is that these programs very consciously change women's mindsets about who they are. They change their beliefs, their self-image, and very directly attack and talk about the social norms that keep women oppressed, including internalized oppression. So self-image becomes important, and many of these programs also teach specific behavioral skills like negotiation skills. Second is that they invest in collective power and solidarity building so that the burden isn't on individuals, but on a collective or groups. Third, as has been mentioned, is they invest heavily in communication strategies, social media, plays, street theater, music, because these methodologies, these approaches are really important to change both our mindsets, but also to penetrate our heart. As has been said, if we take a very instrumental approach, you don't see transformational change. And finally, without finance, as has already been talked about, there's a lot of rhetoric about these things, but I haven't seen large-scale programs that actually invest in these systematically at the country level. So where does that leave interventions like health, education, single sector interventions? I think these are obviously very important and they make a huge difference, but they're not necessarily transformative because they don't by themselves result in changing gender stereotypes. So then the question really is, what should the World Bank do about it? And I want to spend a little bit of time here. I first want to talk about ideology, because I think ideology is really, really important. And what is ideology? Ideology is really the story that we tell ourselves. And gender inequality is a made-up story. But it's a story that's traveled all across the world, including in formerly matrilineal societies, repeated a million times. But we haven't really tried to change the story. We've hoped that if we educate girls and women start earning incomes, the story will change. It has changed only partially. So I want to talk about a little bit of my India research, where I've been talking not to poor people, but spent the last decade talking to educated, middle-class and upper-class men and women and men who believe mostly in gender equality, actually men more than the women. When we talk to women and ask them for 3 words to describe themselves, only 2 women out of 300 used the word power. And we talk to men, including 7-year-old boys. Not a single man used the word love. And boys describe boys being the opposite of what is a girl. So in effect, we have outsourced power to men and love to women. And this hasn't changed, even amongst the educated in India. It hasn't changed in the US, where a recent Pew Research poll shows that 90% of men and women judged it doesn't go away unless we actually deal with it. And as long as we're in this win and lose framework, that if women gain power, men will lose power, we're stuck. So we really, and there will be a backlash. So we really need to expand definitions of masculinity as well as definitions of what it means to be a woman, because that's the core really of patriarchy. So my conclusion at the end of my work, and especially after talking to men and 7-year-old boys, was that we need a strong feminist ideology that's current, that's refined, that goes beyond white feminism, that's global, that centers brown men, women, children, people of all genders, and that without that, we'll continue making some change, but we're not going to make the great leap forward in a few decades rather than centuries. The last thing I want to say is feminism is not dangerous. So let me just give you one example from a 13-year-old Matmul in Mumbai. When I asked him what was the result of a 20-hour feminist program that he attended, he said, now when I get angry, I don't throw my things around. I don't yell at my mother. I don't yell at my sisters. I go in front of a mirror and I talk to myself. And I say, don't be angry, you'll get another chance. So I end my work by calling for a new feminism, a feminism X, that invites men in, because without male leadership, men still hold the power. We're not going to see changes. And also because men are trapped in a very narrow definitions of masculinity. And men want to change and need opportunities to change. So what is it that the World Bank can do? On any sector that involves human beings, you've got to have programs that are integral to these programs, that start dialogues with men and women about power and about what it means to be a man and woman. And I think the challenge is, can the World Bank become a feminist organization?
Thank you very much, Deepa. I really appreciate that you've got up from your sickbed to talk to us. We're now going to conclude. I'm so sorry we are over time, and I'm going to just make some brief concluding remarks. I want to begin by saying that I am really humbled by the really rich discussions and suggestions that we've had from all the participants. And I'm just going to download a few things that I've heard, but it's going to take more reflection to fully absorb everything that's been said. We started the discussion thinking about what needs to come next and what should the World Bank do. We heard that governments need to be in the driver's seat and advance gender equality by having national strategies and a fiscal policy that supports the national strategy. Minister Sri Mulyani talked about better data and knowledge to design and implement more effective policies and programs, and including economic opportunities for women. And also communication. Minister Sri Mulyani talked about communication to facilitate legislative and policy reforms. Minister Ahmed made the point about the importance of gender responsive budgeting, also informed by sex disaggregated data, and the role, the interesting role she has in coordinating policies across sectors, because she's Minister of Finance, Budget and Planning. She also recognized the importance of legislative reforms and processes to bring more women into leadership roles, underlining the fact that there weren't enough women in leadership roles in government. We had one representative from the private sector, and then Ms. Danaj also spoke about the private sector, and I was very struck by what was said about the role of financial and business services to empower women entrepreneurs, and how there are further opportunities for women that can be brought in through better company governance, through procurement systems, and through both local and international partnerships, and including universities and partnerships with international financial institutions. On the issue of partnership, we had contributions from
فيما
many
يتعلق بالشراكة
different
حظينا
viewpoints.
بمساهمات من عدة وجهات نظر.
Sorry, I can hear. Yeah, very good. I want to reflect on what Fareed said about how advancing gender equality really requires institutions like the World Bank to bring that lens to every operation, and also have this positive collision between international and local partnerships. And then Ms. Dinaj Anila, she talked about governments needing to be proactive in involving the private sector and civil society organizations. We had a wide-ranging discussion on social norms, including from Deepa at the end. And to me, what was very striking is what Imam Hamidin said about traditional community leaders playing a very important role in influencing the mindsets of both boys and men, but also women and girls. And the role that governments and development partners can play in supporting and strengthening the voice of community leaders. And Deepa, what I took away from what you said is we really need to an approach that changes mindsets of both men and women. I was struck by what you said about men being trapped in their own narrative, in addition to women being trapped in their narrative. So as I said, I need to reflect, we all need to reflect a lot more on what has been said, but I really take to heart the comments made by Minister Sri Mulyani in the final session, where she really urged the World Bank to better leverage digital technology and social media to strengthen the gender lens to everything that we do, and try and influence minds and hearts of both men and women. So that's something we will indeed reflect on. Let me just conclude by saying a deep and sincere thank you for everybody who has thought so much and contributed so deeply to this discussion. And I also want to reflect what our Managing Director, Mari Pangestu, said at the start. This is just the start of a year-long reflection we intend to have on gender equality and how the World Bank can do better. Please engage with us. Please give us your thoughts, your suggestions, your ideas. And I hope that we will have a strong and inclusive and gender strategy at the end of this, which reflects the participation of all of you. So with that, thank you very much. Bye for now, and apologies for taking a little longer than we intended to. Thank you. Bye-bye.